Today's recipe is vegan chocolate pudding, and it is so good. Nobody's going to know it's vegan. It's creamy and delicious, but it's also healthy and full of protein. At the end, I'll show you how to turn it into a delicious, light and fluffy chocolate mousse if you want to go fancy for Valentine's Day. I make it creamy with silken tofu. Now, if you're not familiar with this kind of silken tofu, it is extra firm silken tofu. Silken tofu that you find in the grocery store, in the produce aisle with the other tofus, is soft tofu, and we're wanting an extra firm silken tofu to make a really nice thick chocolate pudding. You're going to find this in the Asian section of your grocery store. To get started, we're just going to add 2 containers of the silken tofu to our blender. A lot of these chocolate pudding recipes online just call for tofu and some melted chocolate, and that is just not going to make a really good pudding consistency. And to be honest, it does have a little bit of a tofu taste, which I do not love. So what I like to do to my tofu is add some milk, and that spreads out the tofu flavor so you don't really taste it. And I also like to cut down the sugar a little bit. So I'm using half dates and half regular sugar. Now, I'm using the medjool dates because they're nice and juicy to make sure that they blend up nice and smooth. I've been soaking my dates in my non-dairy milk for quite some time, so they should be ready to blend up. To that, I'm going to add an entire can of full-fat coconut milk. This is also in the Asian section of your grocery store, and it adds a lot of creaminess to your pudding as well. We are going to add in some white sugar, some cornstarch. Now, if you don't want to use cornstarch, you can use arrowroot powder here, and that would work just fine. And I'm going to add in a little vanilla. Oh, a little vanilla. That I'm going to add a little bit of cocoa powder. And a smidge of salt. Let's blend up our pudding. It's important to make sure this is blended super smooth. You don't want any grittiness from the dates or the tofu to ruin the creaminess of your pudding. So just let it go for a good few minutes. Our pudding is ready to put into the pan and cook to thicken. So let's do that real quick. Smooth chocolate pudding. Now this is a larger batch of pudding than just one box. It'd be worth probably at least 2 or 3 boxes of pudding. My mom always made chocolate pies when I was a kid, and this is probably enough to make 2 good-sized chocolate pies. If you don't need that much pudding, you can cut the recipe in half. This is just like any other pudding. You need to cook it and stir it so it doesn't stick to the bottom. But you can see how it's already a little thick from the tofu and the dates. So let's just let this cook. We need to get it boiling. Do you see how it's starting to boil and some of those little bubbles are starting to come right through? You want to make sure you're still stirring it, and you want it to do that for a good minute or so to make sure that cornstarch is cooked all the way through and you're not going to have any cornstarch taste in your pudding. All right, our pudding is done. I'm going to put it into some ramekins to chill. If you just want some pudding, this is the best way to do it. We'll shave some chocolate on top to make it really pretty. But if you want to take it up a notch and get really fancy and make it into a really fluffy mousse, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Aquafaba, if you've not heard about it, is the juice from a can of chickpeas. And we're going to take the juice from this can of chickpeas, we're going to whip it up till it's fluffy and thick, and we're going to fold it into our chocolate pudding, and you'll see how that makes a nice fluffy mousse. So let's put this in the fridge to cool off. When you're storing pudding in the refrigerator, it's a good idea to put some plastic wrap. That will keep a skin from forming. Now let's stick these in the fridge. To whip up the aquafaba, it's super easy. We're just going to open our can and dump the juice right into our mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer like this, you can always use a hand mixer. We're going to put on our whip. And get it whipping. I'm going to put it on high. Once it starts to get fluffy, you're going to want to add some cream of tartar. And this will keep it from falling down too quickly. It does take a bit to get it to whip up to stiff peaks. You can see now it's got soft peaks. We're going to let it whip a little longer. Look at that. It is looking really good. Now that is perfect. We're going to fold this into our chocolate pudding. There's our pudding. And I'm going to put in some of the aquafaba. Oops, I need a spatula. We talked about earlier, this could easily make into a pie, but it could also be made into a refrigerator cake with some cookies, layered, and you don't have to bake it or anything. That's always good. But pudding is just a favorite dessert just by itself. You don't want to over mix it or it's going to unfluff, if that makes any sense, and we don't want it to unfluff. It takes a little while, but you just need to keep stirring it until there's no white streaks at all. All right, now let's take our fluffy pudding and put it into these containers. We just need to wipe off the edges of this real quickly so that it presents nicely. And again, we're going to stick this in the fridge to cool, but before we do that, we want to put some plastic wrap over the top. Well, that cools. I'm going to clean up real quick, and I'll be back in a minute to show you the finished product and give it a taste. I put a little dollop of plant-based whipped cream on top of this. I'm just going to shave a little bit of chocolate on top of my pudding just to make it look pretty. Now this is a dark chocolate and it's dairy-free. Look how pretty that is. And it makes a fantastic dessert. It is so good, but you need to try that mousse. Look at this chocolate mousse. Look how rich, thick. You can put anything you want on top of this chocolate mousse. You can put strawberries or fresh berries, but my husband really likes cherries and chocolate. I made this beautiful cherry compote that I'm going to put on top of here along with some shaved chocolate, and it's going to be delicious. If you love learning new ways to use tofu, then check out my tofu playlist right here. It's so good.